Well, on a day like today, may as well do some actual modelling, because there's not much to do outside.
Hello there, welcome back and welcome to part 26, no 36, crikey these do mount up don't they, part 36 of my build log of the Trumpeter 1 to 200 scale model of the Titanic. Today I am focusing primarily on A-deck interior lighting, but I'm also doing a few little touch-up bits of work around A-deck as well, outstanding little jobs that needed doing. So without any further ado, let's crack on. So the first thing I'm doing is just adding the additional window frames that I hadn't already completed. These are for the corridors that connect the aft section of a deck, so aft grand staircase and the smoking room, to the forward section including the lounge and reading room, that sort of thing. So same process as before, just very gently going over with fairly small amounts of glue and then using blue tack to actually stick the frame in place.
So I'm just doing a little bit of repair work on the Scaledecks, and actually repair work isn't the right word at all. So if I was building the model directly out the box, without any add-ons or anything like that, these sections here, they should have pillars which stand up and support the next deck up, you know, because if you look, there's quite a large area without any support going up, so there's pillars there, and there's also pillars on other areas of a deck going up to the boat deck where there isn't enough support. And doing the kit directly out the box, these pillars are achieved by a clear piece of plastic that slots in here, and the idea is that you paint white pillars on the plastic at various intervals, which is all very well. The problem for me though is that the clear plastic is actually very visible, and it just looks like a sheet of glass with some white paint painted on it. So for me, it's not really good enough. I don't think it's accurate enough. So what I'm doing instead is I'm going to just put some actual physical pillars in here. But the problem is that Scaledecks is made to accept this piece of clear plastic, which of course I don't want, and I don't want these sort of ugly sort of cutouts in the deck. So what I've done is I've sort of ripped apart a spare piece of Scaledecks that I'm not using, and I've cut out an additional section, and I'm going to use this to fill these gaps. So that's what it looks like, and you see I'll glue it in place in a bit. As you can see, it's not perfect by any means, but bear in mind you're only going to be able to see this through these windows here. So in reality it doesn't need to be perfect at all, it just needs to be good enough to hide what we're trying to hide. Bear in mind, of course, as well, that there'll be pillars on top of this. There'll also be people, there'll be things to distract the eye. But this will, hopefully, cover up what is otherwise quite a obvious blemish on the model.
So here we are, and I'm just sticking this piece down using Gorilla Glue, as I've used with the rest of the Scaledecks throughout the model. The real challenge here is cutting the new piece of decking out in such a way that it lines up with the other planks on the model. And I'm acutely aware that this is one of these jobs where I'll spend a lot of time on it now, and it's probably something that you'll look back on and think, I didn't really need to spend that much time. I didn't need to get the planks aligned quite in the same way, because, you know, planks by their very nature don't look aligned. They're different colours and such. But it took a lot of time to get this piece straight, but once in place, it does look quite good.
So there we are. It's not perfect by any means, but it's pretty good. The camera's struggling to focus on it, which I suspect is a good sign, means it's blending in nicely with the rest of the decks. And you know, to the casual eye, by the time there are pillars on top of this and there's people and deck chairs and all the rest of the paraphernalia, it will look pretty good. It's not perfect, but then there's no such thing as a perfect model, is there? I mean, the only perfect model of the Titanic is 2.5 miles down at the bottom of the Atlantic. So that's not going to be achieved. But anyway, a couple of others to do, one on either side of the deck, just after the expansion joints. So we'll crack on with them, and then I will start on other stuff. There we are, all 3 deck sections complete. So I'm just doing a bit of soldering, and to start with, see this wire here that connects allows power to get up from the hull of the ship. It's just too long. It's impractically long and it gets in the way. So what I'm doing is I'm just shortening it. So I just desoldered. And now we're going to resolder once I've stripped the wires. It's useful if you have a good set of stuff when you're soldering, because the quality of the tools I find on this particularly make a big difference. You know, nice sharp cutters, a good set of these for stripping the wire, that kind of stuff. Right. Now, which was positive? Add a wee bit more solder to the positive connection, because there wasn't a lot there. So, interior lighting. I've already done the front section, you can see here. And that's up to the grand staircase area. There's not a huge amount of lights, but I am bearing in mind that we are going to get some light coming up from this hole below. So I'm conscious that I don't want too much stuff. I don't want it to look like there's a massive disco going on. I'm not sure what to do here yet, because I'm still waiting on the grand staircase. I don't really want to commit to putting anything in the ceiling until I know the shape of the hole that's going to be here. So I'm sort of going to leave that for now. Over here, this is the writing room and then the lounge. So I'm going to do a strip along there and a strip along there. And that caters for this sort of section and then along here, and it avoids the middle piece here. Then we've got two hallways leading us out to the aft grand staircase. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there. I'm sort of hoping that the diffuse light coming from either side might illuminate these well enough without needing any lights above, but we'll see. Not too sure, but anyway, for now, I'm not going to put any lighting there. Similarly, same issue I've got with the forward grand staircase. Don't really know what's going to go on there, so I'm loath to put anything here until I know. And then we finally got the smoking room and veranda palm courts, and as I did with the lounge and the reading room, I'm going to do a strip either side, and that accounts for this sort of cutout in the middle of the room, and it also allows me to effectively light the rather small veranda cafes at either side. So that's the plan. So to put on the orangey kind of film I'm using to give the impression of old 1912 filament bulbs, what I'm doing is, this is actually a self-adhesive piece of plastic, but I don't trust the self-adhesive on this because it's not the most powerful thing in the world. Unlike with a lot of things on this particular model, I'm not going to have masses of access to this once the model's all built up, so I don't really want to have to go back to this kind of thing and change it. It just seems a bit silly. So what I'm doing is I'm getting my strip of LED, peeling the adhesive off the back of that as well. sticking it down, rolling it over, and then on the underside I'm putting a small bead of glue before rolling it over again, pressing down nice and hard, and that's it really. Now this LED is pretty much eternally encased in this plastic, and then clip off the ends as you do. Simple. So for actually attaching the stuff down, it's pretty simple. Just put a run of glue add the lights down. Important to be precise where you're putting them. There you are. It's not a complex piece of work really. For connecting wires to these things, there are pads on this LED strip already, but it's very difficult to get the plastic coating off them. So normally what I do is I run the soldering iron over them a bit, and that just sort of scratches up the copper, gets rid of any oxide on the copper, makes it much more easy to actually solder down onto it. And then I tend to make a ball of solder on the pad before I go anywhere near it with any wires, and it just makes the soldering process a lot easier. There we are. And now, because we've already got that solder on the joint already, it's actually a lot easier to get the wiring done efficiently later. If I can just reflow that solder, and work out where my wire needs to get to. Cut it to the appropriate length. Strip a small amount of wire off the top. And then just a case of reflowing the solder once again. And there you have it. So here we are again. This time with the negative, or the 0 volt line. What I'm doing is reflowing the solder, and that allows me to get a really nice bond. Then it's a case of working out how much wire you need, trimming it down, stripping all of the wire off, and then reflowing the joint at the end. So here we are with lighting on a deck interior. Sorry I've not been able to show much of this, mainly really just because the camera angles are crap, because my hands are all in here and you've got to get up quite close to the wiring to make it work. But anyway, the general principle is it's a massive set of parallel circuits basically, so obviously all these LEDs are in parallel. Here's the main incomer that comes from B deck, and then this connection goes to here, which is connected to here, which connects across to here, here, which also connects into there. So everything's connected up. In a few places I've had to do some fairly circuitous wiring. This is fairly self-explanatory really. That's just at the extremities of the smoking room and the veranda court and veranda cafe palm court, sorry. This is at the aft side of the aft grand staircase. Lounge, of course, reading and writing room here. The forward grand staircase is around about here. In reality, this is about where the lifts or elevators would have been, so this is where I'm choosing to put my LED strip for this section. And then we've got the cabins and such further forward, which of course on my model aren't decorated, so that's nice and easy to get an LED strip in for. So I'm going to plug these in, see how they fare.
In this clip, I'm just adding a thin sheet of glass behind all of the cabin windows on A deck. This procedure worked very well on B deck, and I'm quite happy to repeat it. To me, these windows are too small to have individual pieces of glass in them, and they're also behind the the actual promenades themselves, so they're significantly less visible than they would be if they were flush up against the side of the ship. So this works very well, and it still allows that sort of reflective element that panes of glass give you in the windows. And as I did on B deck once again, I am adding some frosted acrylic sections which are just really behind where the deck housing goes. So the idea of these is that this is actually thin acrylic sheet that I've just rubbed with a piece of sandpaper. And the idea is that it sort of hides the fact that there's no detail in these cabins. So it allows light to shine through the window quite happily. And because the acrylic panes are spaced slightly behind where the deck housing will be, it does give the appearance of some depth in the room, but it also sort of subtly hides the fact that there's really nothing actually there. So it gives you the appearance of depth and the appearance of a room behind, but just hides that I haven't actually bothered to put any detail there at all. And this works very well, and certainly it worked very well on B deck, where in reality the cabins are more visible, because on A deck you've got the promenade deck sort of spacing the viewer's eye from the model. One thing I'm having to be quite careful of is that the A deck deck housings are comparatively quite low here, so I'm having to make sure that these pieces of plastic are low enough that they fit within the roof. But all in all, a relatively simple process, just using CA glue to stick them in place.
So as a first test of the A deck lights, pretty good really. Note that this isn't perfectly seated so far, so you do see a bit of light coming from underneath, but it's pretty good. Got a nice view of the reading room there, and the lounge looks very nice. As I sort of suspected, not a lot of detail can be seen through the windows of the smoking room. And then finally we've got the veranda palm court at the end. This corridor in the middle looks completely unlit, but I'm not going to do anything yet until I got the deck lighting in, because that might have an effect. But as you can see, there's a few areas where this just now isn't quite sitting flush. And what I suspect is happening, some areas are fine, like there, but other areas, like back here, not so fine. And I suspect what's actually happening is that the rubbery part of the light is fouling on the walls, like there. So by cutting out the rubber in those sections, I'll be able to get it to sit flush. So I just need to work on these pieces now. These are the sort of the doors at either end, either side of the A deck promenade. And I'm not entirely sure what they're there for, but my assumption is that they're there to stop the A deck promenades essentially becoming a wind tunnel. You know, by having these there, you've got a physical barrier that stops wind flowing down the tunnel, so to speak. So that's kind of what I assume they're there for. Whether I'm right or not is another matter. But of course, one of the slight issues is that they do rather foul on the roof beams that I've done, which isn't a huge issue. I just need to make note of where they foul and then cut around them accordingly. And that sorts out the issue fairly easily. And then there we have it. And that's now ready to be glued in place nice and happily. So I'll do the same with the other side, and then I'll glue them in.
So exactly the same process here, just measure up and cut out. In this clip I'm just adding final window decorations. I hadn't yet got around to adding the windows to the aft and actually the forward grand staircase entrances, so they're being done. I'm also adding the ventilator covers at the very aft of a deck, and some additional windows there which had not yet been done. So I've just gone around the forecastle area and the forward well deck, just adding a little bit of distress to various different things. For example, areas like the crane, any sort of nooks and crannies, sort of tracked a bit of dirt. Same on the other side. Tried to add a little bit to these cargo hatches, just sort of around where the folds in the material are. Same on the top here. Onto the actual forecastle as well. Then a couple of little streaks sort of coming down
off the forward cargo hatch, just because that's where the rain would sort of come down, you know, it would dribble down the side. And I've done the same sort of stuff on this ventilator here, and also the cargo, the winch here, which is covered over with a cloth. I've done it a bit heavier on the air vent, just because, as we know, air vents get clagged up with all sorts of horrible stuff very, very quickly. So I think it's quite reasonable to assume that this would already have been fairly dirty by the time passengers got onto Titanic, bearing in mind that the air vent itself would already have been in operation, feeding air into the rooms beneath for a matter of months at this point. So lots of reason to assume that that actually might have been reasonably dirty about that point. And I've done a bit more just at the very front on the anchor. Again, an area where a lot of rubbish is going to accumulate very quickly, and practically the first time that anchor gets used, this area is going to become awash with salty, horrible water, grease and dirt and grime. So despite being a new ship, this area as well is going to end up getting dirty relatively quickly. So I'm quite happy with how it's turned out. For the most part, except for the really sort of heavy machinery areas, it's quite subtle. But it does the job. It just picks out little detail a bit better, you know, just if it's all painted white, it's quite difficult to pick out the detail, but just by adding that little shade of black wash, you just pick out the details a little bit more. So, as with the forecastle, I've just gone and done exactly the same thing to the poop deck and to the aft well deck. Just sort of gone over and very, very lightly weathered various different bits with a black wash. Again, really the idea here is just to pick out little details, stuff like here, you know, just by adding a little bit of wash here, pick out that detail quite nicely. And again, it's really subtle, to the point that I think the camera probably struggles to pick it up, but it is there, just light sort of, couple of little scuffs in places and slight darkening of the paint from white to a sort of light grey. And it's good because it does just sort of change the appearance from a sort of unnaturally new ship to a new ship, and that's kind of what I'm going for. It does want to look new, but it doesn't want to look like it's just come out of factory, you know, because it hasn't. Some parts of the ship are 2 years old by this point. So subtle, but still visible. That's the sort of thing I'm going for. In other news, I've finally got around to doing the dado rail sort of thing between the aft well deck and B deck above. I'm still not entirely sure what I should be calling this, but I can't think of a better word than dado rail, so unless anyone has any other suggestions, that's what I'll continue to refer to it as. But anyway, what I'm talking about is this sort of woody, browny kind of line that sort of is at the end of each deck, and it's actually it is quite nice. It sort of defines each deck quite effectively, and it does look very nice. So for that, I've used the same 0.8mm Plaststruct styrene rods that I used for all of the ribbing on a deck's ceiling. So exactly the same stuff, just painted brown, but it looks quite good, I think. Right, so here we are with A-deck internal lights done, and by and large I'm pretty happy with it. There's no light bleed from the top, but you'd expect that because on A-deck the deck houses sort of have an artificial ceiling moulded into the plastic, so that's useful. And yeah, it looks pretty good really. There is a bit of light bleed from the bottom. That's just really because things aren't properly seated yet, you know. I've not gone through and properly made sure everything's down. For example, you know, the boat deck is, just because it's slightly bent, is sitting slightly high of where it should be. It should be down here a bit more, so it's pointing up about 1 mil. But these are all just little issues with tightening bolts in the right places and stuff. The only thing I am more concerned about is at the smoking room end, where you can see there's quite a big gap, and that looks like something's genuinely not seated properly. And I'm sort of trying to artificially push it down, but I think it's going to take disassembly and then making sure everything's snapped into place first before I then reattach it, and hopefully that'll solve the issue. But it does look pretty good. I mean, I'm happy with the look of it. It doesn't look out of kilter with the decks below it. Obviously it looks a bit dimmer, but that's because the rooms are recessed by, I don't know, in scale terms, about 2 or 3 meters, you know, so that kind of makes sense, really. If we look down, it looks pretty good, actually. Remember, we'll never have this view in reality because there is a door sort of ending the promenades. So the slight bleed on the actual seaward side, I'm not concerned about because you'll never be able to see it. The light bleed coming from the bottom of the deck housing, as I say, is just due to things not quite being seated properly. And that is solvable. And this actually comes on to my sort of method for the top. So at the top, I have these bolts now go straight through and hold the boat deck and A deck deck housings down onto B deck. And so far, there's only 4. Whereas in reality, when complete, I should have another 2 at the front. So the 2 at the front should sort out these deck bleed issues here, because they'll be giving a nice down force here. As I said previously, the only one that I really need to sort out is this one at the back, where the plastic just hasn't seated properly.
So there you are, that's the end of this episode. I've covered everything I'm going to cover. I hope you have enjoyed it, got something from it. If you have got any questions, comments, what have you, whack them down below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. Please do like and subscribe, it is helpful if you do that. If you're interested in seeing stuff before I release videos, check out my Instagram page, and I will see you in the next video when I'll be doing the exterior A-deck lights. But until then, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.